I'm Dennis Berckefeldt, and I want to thank Mark and Mike for bringing me into the Gary Reilly family, because they showed up in my office one day and said, we need to have somebody read from this Enlisted Men's Club this novel. Gary can't do it himself, and it was suggested that maybe you would, and I said, oh yeah, I'd love to do it. And I read the book and I thought, oh man, am I so glad that I agreed to do this, because it was just it's an amazing book. I'm going to make a couple of comments before I read. The novel is in 3 parts, which is a little unusual. Even more unusual is the first part is in third person, the second part is in first person, and the third part is in third person again, which is a little, so you kind of jump time. And even within the second part, which is all in first person, it jumps time. But it does it so seamlessly. You go back and forth from Los Angeles to San Francisco within the same, you're in the same milieu, but all of a sudden, well, I'm in L.A., and it's last week, now I'm in San Francisco, and it's this week, and now I'm back in Los Angeles, it's the last week, and it's seamless. It just goes, you have no problem. It's like writing really, really good dialogue. You don't need a lot of dialogue tags to tell you who's speaking, because it's so seamless and so clear as to where and what you are. The magic of Gary's writing. The other thing I'd like to say about his writing is that the cliche that the travel is not the destination, it's the journey. It's how you get there that is what is most important, rather than what happens when you get there. And that's very true of all 3 of these novels, that it is, the writing is all about experiencing the journey, how Palmer gets from here to there and what he goes through and what he thinks. He's a masterful writer. Just the one question that I really would like to ask Gary, I'm sorry I can't, why did you write it in first and third person? I would love to know why you made that decision to do it. It works, but why did you decide to do it? Because easily could have been in third person all the way through, or these all could have been in first person all the way through. So I keep thinking about that a little bit. So I'm going to read from all 3 sections of the book, which is a little bit more than normally we would read at something like this, but I sort of wanted to cover because there was differences. Excuse me. And spoiler alert, he does get to be a cab driver. I don't want to just ruin it for you, but he does get to be a cab driver. So he's back in Denver now. He's left Vietnam, and it's a little bit of a time frame. He comes back. He was in Vietnam in the late 60s. And then he gets back to Denver, and it's sort of into the 70s, and then sometimes it's into the 80s, and so there's some time differences about where he is, because he thinks about some things that occurred before. He's living with his brother Mike, who he actually kept from going to Vietnam in the first Enlisted Men's Club. He does a little juxtapositioning things and makes certain that his brother doesn't end up going to Vietnam, that he goes instead, which is a wonderful part of the end of the Enlisted Men's Club. But anyway, he's back in Denver now. He's living with his brother Mike. In the second section, his brother Mike is now living in San Francisco, which is why he's also in San Francisco. So it's not all gruesome, but a lot of it is gruesome. So here we go. And I had to, trying to turn pages in a book is always kind of a pain in the patootie. So I photocopied. That makes it easier. I didn't violate any copyright standards, just to photocopy these. Now I'm losing my pages, of course I do. He arose now and twisted the valve on the small brown tin gas heater on the floor against the wall and held his palms above the hot surface. His forearms and fingers had an aching weakness which he felt could only be alleviated by lifting barbells. He put a pan of water on to boil and got dressed. Gloves and a knit hat for a short journey, he stepped into the wall of cold and hopped through the snow to the mailbox. Breakfast was a box of Kraft dinner and a Coke. It had been weeks since he had eaten like a human being. He entertained the notion of going each day to a restaurant and having a square meal, not unlike an army meal, but another $68 check from the state. They were piling up. He would not be touching the cash from these checks until the thaw. A letter from UCD. You have been accepted. Those D minuses in high school Latin were paying off. His friends used to talk about buying a few acres in the Rockies to escape modern life. a perennial plan. They would never do it, and he would never go back to school. He gazed at the silken folds of the melted cheese and macaroni. Almost $300 a month for 4 years, a little memento of the war. He finished his meal and searched the channels for a TV show, turned the sound off on a baseball game, and watched muted fouls. The walls of the apartment plastered concrete were cold, and he turned the heat up. He would not be driving across the Continental Divide in this weather. Either California would wait until spring, or he would take a bus. No more flying. Anyway, the Buick wouldn't make it even in nice weather. Although, if it broke down on the road in a spot chosen by the death angel of vintage heaps, it would not be such a calamity. This was America, not a lonely road in Vietnam. The car breaks down, you walk. Shoe leather wears out, you thumb. Without sound, the TV commercials revealed themselves desperate, startling graphics and facts, impotent without trumpets. A woman holding a can of deodorant, lips moving, an actress who will say anything for money. The room grew too hot. He was drowsy. He lowered the heat and turned up the TV, switched to a Dead End Kids, dubbed in Spanish, then turned it off. His body felt like a giant knuckle which begged to be popped. He looked at his splayed palms. Pot fascination. He had first gotten stoned in the war, and had stared at his arms and fingers, and realized he was a system of bicycle handbrake cables. Stared for hours, flexing his fingers, trying to catch his brain giving the command. But it was like trying to see your own eyes move in a mirror. He listened to the hiss of gas. How could the government allow gas pipes to run throughout a city? The bodies of gas victims are said to be black, bloated. He'd never seen a dead man, not even in war. The soldier who blew his own head off was taken away beneath a poncho liner. Doughboys stepped through the rotted corpses of trench dead, their boots sinking through the rib cage like ash. Gas masks had more than one function. He had dreamed of knife blades slicing his belly, dreamed of cats, vicious spitting cats, clinging to his body, claws digging in painlessly as he imagined a starfish might grip. How he hated those dreams. The money would run out after 6 months. He did not know what he was supposed to do. Grade school, high school, college or the army. Then you get a job based on the skills acquired over the preceding 15 years. He had expected to die in Vietnam. He'd made no plans. He turned the record player on. It was a toy, and he put on the 45 record he had found at a furniture store on Santa Fe Drive, which had a strange little department dealing in golden oldies. It was the melody which had played again and again at the party where he had parted company with Matthews, a record he might never have found, believing it to be one of those melodies you hear only once and lose forever. Had he once caught it at the end of a distant static Oklahoma station while returning one night from a bar? In the Mood, by Glenn Miller. On the flip side was String of Pearls, the music with which his parents had danced off to war. He played it every day and thought of Jimmy Stewart. A woman in a bar on Pearl Street had insisted the role of Glenn Miller had been portrayed by Steve Allen. His brother Mike had asked why he wallowed in that old crap. And Palmer said big band would outlive all other forms of 20th century music. It was the soundtrack of every film he had as a child seen on TV. Black and white messages. At the age of 10, he was stunned to learn that the Little Rascals were all grown up. The girls had children. He had entertained the fantasy that he could go to Hollywood and talk to Alfalfa. If the 45 wore out, he would return to the furniture store and buy a new one. He wondered what had become of the thick 33 RPM records which had belonged to his parents. They shattered so easily. The snow would melt. It would be warm in a few days. The car would start. Celeste would be home for Christmas break. He had all the time in the world. His final obligation had been to go to a physician and obtain a prescription for a balm which would eradicate the rash. He would be through with Vietnam. He found his hours becoming like the hours spent in the guard towers in Vietnam, reviewing your past life as people who have purportedly gone beyond the pale only to return to tell the non-believers. Every sin, every flaw exposed. And some say that's what hell is all about. He played the record one more time, then forced himself to turn the machine off as he had forced himself to put the Buick into gear. He did not believe he would ever tire of this song. Glenn Miller had died in World War II in a plane crash in the English Channel. Palmer saw the man in a white tuxedo going down in a bomber, and every musical note was that artist trying to say something which he had never been able to say in words. His fear of flying kept Palmer from taking an R&R to Australia, or the sex pits of Bangkok, or to Hawaii or Hong Kong, his fear of flying exceeding even his fear of the war itself. "We all have to go sometime," his buddies had said. I didn't say I was afraid of dying. I said I was afraid of flying. Futility. Someday he would listen to his parents' record collection, play each melody once, and find out who that silent man who went off to World War II was. Returned, married, kids, 30 years with the same company. 6'2" and came home from the Solomon Islands weighing 120. There was a diary, 2 handwritten books among the souvenirs of war in the canvas bag dusty in the basement of their Wichita home. What became of it all? A grass hula skirt, a blue glass cowboy boot bottle, stacks of letters to Palmer's mother-to-be, and an album of photographs. Palmer had his own canvas bag now, had packed his army equipment away, hidden his uniforms in the back of the closet, had thrown out his MP notebook from Fort Gordon. He went to the closet and carefully removed his green Class A uniform and laid it on the bed. 3 medals. There should have been another, but he never got around to purchasing the 4th at a PX. All he had was the written orders. They never gave him the medal itself. A lot of things aren't like they are in the movies. He put his uniform away carefully. The thing would rot at the creases and disintegrate someday, now that it was a part of history, something to show the children he would never beget. He returned to the record player and put Glenn Miller on, just once more, the music which transcends time and knows no audience. The snow would melt. It would be warm in a few days. He applied the ointment to the red and itching patches which had spread from his legs to his arms and chest. He didn't think he would be going to college after all.